Today we're going to tell you the storyline of the movie called All Quiet on Western Front from the year 2022. Telling us the story of a 17-year-old boy who was so enthusiastic to serve his country in a war along with his schoolmates, until they arrived at the war zone and were shriveled up by the cruel reality. So without further ado, let's get straight to the video. But before we start, please support our channel by subscribing and click the bell icon for future notifications. Now, let's start. The movie opens in the middle of the war on the Western Front, where the German soldiers run over the trenches for the next attack. One soldier named Heinrich Gerber was forced into the action, panically hiding, until he finally charged the enemy with his shovel before he met his own end. Later, the surviving soldiers started to gather the dead bodies, including Heinrich's, removed their uniforms, laundered and repaired it for the future soldiers to use. Scene then shifted to a young boy named Paul Baumer. He and his friends Albert Kropp, Franz Muller, and Ludwig Bem yearned to become soldiers to join the war, serving their country, Germany. He surreptitiously enlisted himself, that he even faked his parents' signature on the enlistment form. Paul and the other boys then were gathered for a motivational speech from their principal. As they received their guns and fallen soldiers used uniforms, Paul was given Heinrich's old uniform. They were all so enthusiastic about being a soldier, thinking about how cool they might be, and fantasizing about the girls who approached them later. Paul and the other new soldiers finally went to the front line, with little to no training nor experience, equipped with the fallen soldiers' equipment. Midway, Paul and the other new soldiers were forced to continue their way by foot after their transport trucks were stopped and used to transport injured soldiers back to the barracks. They were attacked by the French army on their way, but thankfully they managed to reach the Western Front trench. The war was still going on at that time, moreover when a hard rain fell over them, forcing some of them to drain the trench to prevent flooding. That evening, Paul and his friend Albert were ordered as watchers. In their watching, Paul spotted a movement in front of him and immediately shot it. But then he was also spotted and got shot in his helmet, thankfully not injured. But then the French army shot a flare near him as an attack point marker. Soon the French started attacking them, forcing them to hide in the bunker. Paul's friend named Ludwig, who initially was very excited to be a soldier, suddenly felt crushed by the cruel war zone reality. He was scared and wanted to go home. But then the fierce attack caused the bunker to collapse, where Paul was trapped and couldn't escape. The next morning, Paul was rescued by the other soldiers from under the rubble. A lot of the soldiers had fallen after the attack, and Paul then was ordered to collect their dog tags, but sadly, there he found Ludwig's corpse missing a leg, left Paul crying and warned his friend. Later that day, Paul and one other soldier named Kat sneaked into a farm to look for food. But then Kat was spotted and they ran off right away while being shot at, with a stolen goose in his arm. They immediately cooked the goose at their camp. They were so happy to be able to eat meat in the middle of a war zone. After their meal, they were relaxing and chatted about their future plans after the war. Soon after, the men received letters from their loved ones. Kat, who was illiterate, then asked Paul to read the letter for him. It turns out that it was from Kat's wife, wishing him to come home safely. Later, Paul and his friends were ordered to recover 60 missing recruits. On their way, they were faced with crushed and stuck corpses on the trees caused by the explosions there. Until they finally arrived at the building the missing recruits were hiding at, just to find them already dead from a poison gas attack. At night, Paul and his unit were woken up to prepare for a French attack. While on the other side, a German official named Matthias Erzberger went to the France side to negotiate an armistice because they were only fighting to seize small territories and the territorial disputes were causing many casualties among soldiers and civilians. The French agreed, but with some conditions that Germany had to fulfill, and the war would continue until Matthias agreed with the conditions. Matthias then immediately went to the German officials. The warfare on the front line finally broke out. The German army attacked the French army across them. The German troops who had arrived at the enemy's position quickly eliminated all French soldiers until none were left. After all the French troops were wiped out, Paul and his friends took the enemy's food and ate it immediately because it was difficult to find food during the war. But the enjoyment didn't last long because French reinforcements arrived using anti-bullet tanks. The German army tried to shoot at the tank, but it was in vain. The arrival of the tank made the German army panic and they decided to retreat. Many German soldiers who were retreating were shot by French tanks from behind and died. Paul, who was also retreating, had to part ways with his friend Franz. The German troops still in the trench also had to die horribly, burned by the French army. Paul, along with Albert and Kat, managed to topple one French tank by throwing a grenade into it. Paul then immediately ran back to the trench. Upon arriving at the trench, he saw Albert already surrounded by the French army, and he eventually also burned to death. Paul had no time to grieve. He immediately ran while carrying ammunition and other equipment. But he had to take cover in a puddle due to air attacks from the French army. As he was about to leave, he was too late because French soldiers were already surrounding the puddle. Soon, there was a French soldier who were going to kill Paul, and he quickly stabbed his enemy until he was helpless. He continued to wait for the departure of the French soldiers until finally Paul felt guilty when he saw his dying enemy in front of him, but in the end, he had to die due to fatal injuries he suffered. After waiting, Matthias finally received a message from his superiors to sign a peace agreement with France. Matthias and his colleagues as representatives of Germany finally signed the peace treaty, and the agreement would take effect on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock a.m., which means that before that time, the war must continue. Feeling that the area was safe, Paul quickly returned to the camp with many bodies around him. Upon arriving at the camp, everyone rejoiced as they were going to go home and meet their families. Paul met his friend Jaden, who had been separated from him and was injured severely in the leg after the trench attack. Jaden also informed Paul that Franz had died, which made Paul very sad as all his school friends had now died. Paul then went to the kitchen to get some food, where he met Kat, who was still alive, and the two of them immediately took some food for themselves and Jaden. While eating, Jaden unexpectedly committed suicide by stabbing his own neck with a fork because he felt he had no other purpose in life since he would be disabled. Paul and Kat tried to help him, but they failed as Jaden had lost too much blood. The next morning, Kat felt peaceful as it was the first time he had experienced a very quiet morning after the war. Feeling hungry, Kat and Paul went back to the farm they had visited before. When they arrived there, Paul went to get food while Kat kept watch. At first, Paul took the goose eggs calmly, but unfortunately, he was caught by a boy who quickly locked the barn door. Paul immediately ran away while being shot at by the farmer, and they both managed to escape. Feeling safe, they ate the raw eggs just to fill their stomachs. Kat then went into the woods to urinate, but suddenly the boy from before came from behind and shot Kat in the stomach. Paul, hearing the gunshot, immediately went into the woods to help Kat. They both then decided to go back to the camp to treat Kat. On the way, they met a group of German soldiers, but the group refused to stop even though Paul asked for help and forced Paul to carry Kat all the way back to the camp. Arriving at the camp, the doctor said that Kat had died of poisoning caused by the bullet that hit him, which was coated with poison. Once again, Paul had lost someone close to him. Shortly after, the general gathered all the soldiers in the field and announced that they had to fight once again to reclaim the territory. The soldiers, who were initially happy to go home, became sad because they couldn't leave. The soldiers had no choice but to fight again because they would be killed if they refused. Long story short, the German troops secretly approached the enemy trenches, but the enemy noticed their presence and the war broke out. This time, Paul had to fight alone because he didn't know anyone else. Paul saw a young soldier and immediately helped him, and he fought one French soldier barehanded. Paul was initially cornered, but he quickly hit the enemy's head with a rock. The fight continued until they both entered a bunker. Inside the bunker, Paul, who was unaware, was stabbed in the back until the knife went through his chest. Dying Paul then went out of the bunker and found that both sides had stopped fighting because it was already 11 o'clock, indicating that Germany and France had made peace. The scene then shifted to the young soldier who was previously helped by Paul. As a new soldier, he was instructed to collect the dog tags of the fallen soldiers, just like Paul did when he was new. While walking through the trench, he met Paul, who had died of a stab wound to the heart. And the movie finally ended. What do you think of the movie? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you won't miss our future recaps. Also, if you have any movie you want us to recap, please do tell us in the comments as well. Until next time.